Welcome to Five or Flop, a podcast for the best and worst historical fiction has to offer. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm Grace, and each week we'll be reading a different historical fiction book to see if they're a five or a flop.
Our theme for season 4 is Reading Rainbow, which means books about the LGBTQ plus community. And this week, we have a very special guest joining us.
And that guest is our friend Jen.
Yay!
Hi, pod listeners. I'm Jen.
Jen, would you like to tell our readers what we're reading this week?
Sure. We are reading Daughters of the Deer by Danielle.
And also, I think I just said readers and not listeners, but I hope our listeners are reading along as well with our Storygraph Reading Challenge.
Yes, absolutely. So last week we read Pull of the Stars, which I feel like when we were creating the list was kind of a Grace pick for the list. Mm-hmm. This is an Erin pick for the list.
Oh, absolutely. So this book was actually one that I bought on our trip to New York last summer, and I read it all basically in one sitting on the train.
And I was very impressed by that because I was next to you on the train, also reading, and I did not finish the book that I was reading.
I'm just a better reader. That's okay. We can admit it. But before we get too far in this episode, I do want to give like a soft disclaimer that we are back in the pod studio this week since there's 3 of us and we learned our lesson with fellow travelers to not record at home.
Some people may have commented that the audio was not that good. To them I say, as a pod host, thank you. As me, I don't want to hear it if the audio's bad.
We don't want complaints around here, only praise. But we also had a little bit of technical difficulty in the studio. So who's editing this? Grace, I think you are. Grace is going to do her best to fix it.
I hope that you just enjoy hearing our insightful commentary and beautiful voices.
As always. But what's new this week? Jen, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, I had a weekend that was out of the ordinary. I had some family come to town.
Woo!
Woohoo! Yeah, it was a great excuse to do things I don't normally do, like go to museums and spend a lot of time on the mall. I went on a tour of the Capitol with them, and we ended up making friends with one of the Capitol staff people, and they took us on an extra special tour. So that was fun and exciting.
Oh, well, that's really great.
I love that you got secret information and also that you and your family are kind Midwesterners, so I'm not surprised that that is the type of thing that would happen to you.
Yeah, no, that does track. Grace, what are you up to? What have you been up to, as if I don't know?
Well, both of you were in attendance. Data scientist Ashley and I hosted a party this past weekend, and the theme of the party was Grashly. So all of the guests you included were required to come dressed up as either one of us or a famous Grace or Ashley. And it was a very good time. You two in particular committed very well to the bit.
Well, Jen went all out with a wig. I didn't go that far.
You didn't need one. You both went all out. And by that, I mean you purchased items to wear to the party.
That was the first time I've worn a skirt in maybe 15 years.
That's kind of crazy.
You know, it was more enjoyable than I expected.
Listen, it's comfortable sometimes to feel free.
I feel it.
You also looked very good as a brunette. And I was very surprised because I feel like you being blonde is an essential part of your Jenness.
Yes, it was my alter ego.
Exactly. You can use the wig again.
The wig really slayed. I went as Grace McCallum, so not our Grace, but gymnast of, I don't know where she's from, Utah, I think, probably.
Yes.
Gymnast of Utah fame, who's gotten me many 10s in our gymnastics fantasy league.
Congratulations. And Erin, do you have anything to share?
I left this spot blank. I'm prepping to go to Ireland, but I think I did talk about that on the Pull of the Stars episode. So
you can report back more later. Why don't you just tell us what you're reading now? Because I see something here.
I actually just finished a little bit ago Room by Emma Donoghue, and I got my mom to read it.
That's a fantastic book.
And I'm not sure what my mom's thoughts are at the moment, but I really enjoyed it. And, I mean, it was sad. Like, the premise of it is sad, but I thought it was very, very well executed and so different than Emma Donoghue's other works.
Jen, have you read that book or seen the movie?
I have not.
Well, I would highly recommend 100%.
Okay.
We can discuss more later. But I have to report back for our pod listeners and not for Erin. I read Emily Henry's new book, and I thought it was quite good. Erin would probably hate it. But that made me think I perhaps want to reread her other books again, because whenever she comes out with a new one, everyone on social media posts like a comprehensive ranking of best to worst. and I don't really have one, so I feel like if I read all the books now, I could form an opinion.
So it's kind of like an adult Dear America.
Exactly. I have a firm favorite and a firm least favorite, and then I have 4 that are like tied in the middle.
Okay, what are your favorites and least favorites?
The worst one is Happy Place, and the best one is Book Lovers.
I'm trying to think. Were either of those what I read?
No,
I read People We Meet on Vacation.
Yeah, I don't think so. So anyway, I'm pondering a reread era. So,
and you know what's actually really sad is that we have Jen on a week where she's not reading something Fourth Wing related, because we have talked about Jen's love of Fourth Wing on the pod before.
I don't know how we would be reading something Fourth Wing related on this pod. It would be kind of a stretch.
No, not on the pod, but while I have the script in front of me, I can see what Jen is reading.
I see. Well, Jen, tell us what you're reading.
That's Sadly, not Fourth Wing.
I wish I could reread Fourth Wing again, but I don't think it would hit quite the same without the novelty. So this is a little out of left field for the historical fiction podcast, but I am reading Oathbringer, which is book number 3 of the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. So I'm like slowly making my way through this high fantasy world, and yeah, it's good so far. I need to take a break from high fantasy to read some other stuff, so Daughters of the Deer was a great interlude, but yeah.
And you are fully invested in the Stormlight Archives. Those books are long as hell, and you have been chipping away at them for a while now.
It's a good break from the chaos of the world, especially in this day and age. I feel like escaping to another world is very refreshing.
Well, in reference to Daughters of the Deer, I would not say that this book was an escape from the world, despite the fact that it takes place in the 1600s in what is now Canada. I would say it is pretty timely and stressful.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Would you like to provide the synopsis, Erin, so our listeners can weigh in on what they think about that?
If I can get my computer to scroll, definitely. Okay, give me 1 second. All right. 1657. Marie, a gifted healer of the Deer clan, does not want to marry the green-eyed soldier from France who has asked for her hand. But her people are threatened by disease and starvation and need help against the Iroquois and their English allies if they are to survive. When her chief begs her to accept the white man's proposal, she cannot refuse him and sheds her deerskin tunic for a borrowed blue wedding dress to become Pierre's bride. 1675. Jean, Marie's oldest child, is 17, neither white nor Algonquin, caught between worlds. Caught by her own desires, too. Her heart belongs to a girl named Josephine, but soon her father will have to find her a husband or be forced to pay a hefty fine to the French crown. Among her mother's people, Jeanne would have been considered blessed, her two-spirited nature a sign of special wisdom. To the settlers of New France, and even to her own father, Jeanne is unnatural, sinful, a woman to be shunned and beaten, and much worse. With poignant, unforgettable story of Marie and Jeanne, Danielle reaches back through the centuries to touch the very origin of the long history of violence against Indigenous women and the deliberate, equally violent disruption of First Nations cultures.
Great job.
Thank you.
I could see you bringing the passion even though as you were getting to the very long end part.
I got into it with the hand movements when it said touch the very origin. That just, I don't know, really sat with me. I appreciated it. Shall I get into Danielle?
Let's, and her funny name.
So yes, Daniel is not Danielle's maiden last name, so her parents did not name her Danielle to the best of my knowledge. If they had, that'd be a little wacky. But Danielle was raised in Ontario and has 3 novels: Forever Birchwood, Reasons to Look at the Night Sky, and this one, which is her first novel for adults, actually. So Daughters of the Deer is inspired by the lives of her ancestors. She is Métis. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong because it's French and I have not taken French in many years. But that just essentially is an Indigenous nation. But Métis is an Indigenous nation of Canada that is descendant from mixed families. So like the characters in this book. But she wasn't encouraged to learn about her culture at all. And then I kind of came across something weird, which I know you did as well reading this. I came across a Reddit thread about her that on a previous page on her website, she had released a statement saying she no longer identifies as Métis, but I couldn't find that on her website again anymore.
It's not there now. It seems like she changes her website with relative frequency. I don't think that's weird. I think a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
But you can access it. You can access it on the Wayback Machine if you trust the Wayback Machine or have used it before. Yeah, so there's some up in the airness about what she identifies as in terms of being Matisse, being mixed, being another third thing, we don't know. Which
is something to keep in mind with this book, as we've talked about. Chains comes to mind about an author portraying a character that is not of their same background. I think just something to consider. Although with this book it is explicitly about her ancestors and about her heritage, like the lineage in this book comes from her own family. So that is another thing to consider as, thinking of someone who might not fully identify with this population writing about it.
Yeah, I don't want to say that that's wrong. Like, even we had a discussion about chains where I said I think you can firmly do that. But in this case, it's a little different because regardless, these are people in her family. So I just think it's interesting to note how, because it's the topic of the book, how identities change as families and cultures intermarry. So that is very much a positive, a prescient question here.
Exactly. So just something to keep in mind. Take it with a grain of salt as you're reading, as you're listening. Form your own opinions. Do your own research. Trust the Wayback Machine if you want to. I did not go that route, mostly because I didn't think of it. One more fun fact about Danielle. She is also a self-taught artist, and her work has been seen in galleries and private collections across Europe and the US and Canada.
Ooh.
So that's kind of cool. She has some of the paintings on her website. They're pretty unique. I would encourage everyone to take a look.
That's beautiful. Glad to hear.
Have any of you read anything else by Danielle? Have you read this before? I have read this one, but that is it.
I have not read any of her works before.
Me neither, and I had not heard of her. I think, given that she only has this one book for adults and she is Canadian, that is not strange. When you bought this book when we were in New York, did you just pick it up and think that it seemed interesting?
Yeah, no, it was just a complete grab. I thought the color was... The cover kind of has these nice, muted colors on it, and I really liked it. I am 100% a judge a book by its cover kind of gal, so...
Okay. Well, that's the beauty of being a reader that can just walk into a bookstore or a library, like where we are now, and pick something up and discover something new.
Yeah. And as far as I know, none of her works for children, for adults, have been adapted into anything with TV shows or movies, so that kind of knocks us out for the pod bonus episode.
That's kind of good. When there are too many, it gets hard to eliminate.
It gets really hard. And you know what, Grace? I just had a really, really great idea for a bonus episode for the pod, and I completely blanked on it.
Hopefully it comes to you while you're in the middle of saying something else.
I know, because I thought of it yesterday, and I'm like, oh my god, I need to write this down. And of course, I did not write it down. So
folly is man.
Grace, you want to share a disclaimer before we make Jen get us started with conversation?
Sure. I feel like I never give the disclaimer.
I know.
Okay. Well, our judgments come based solely on the book and the characters within the book, not any real historical figures they may have been based on. In this case, of course, they are real historical figures, but not famous ones like we often have. Interesting line to walk. But yeah, we're just looking at this as a piece of literature.
Jen, what do you want to start with? Where take us somewhere?
Sure. So I think first I'd like to start with some of the more broader takeaways from this book. I think, I really liked it, but it wasn't until I got through the book that I think I was able to say that with certainty. I thought it was a great book and really beautiful and really evocative, but when I started reading the book, the prose felt very quiet and understated to me, and coming from, as you know, high fantasy, that was a big switch. So it almost felt like I was reading an ASMR script. When I awoke, there were the cries of the children.
It sounded like when we had Diana on the podcast for Magic Treehouse is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
That is how she talks.
Yes. I kind of thought the same thing. The word that I wrote down to describe the prose was spare. It was simple in a very effective way, and I enjoyed that, and I felt like the character that you open with is Marie, who is Algonquin, and you find her voice right away. And that's one of and in my opinion, I would probably call it the strongest part of the book for me was Marie's character. And that style of prose really serves to hold up her voice very, very well.
You see, that's interesting because I found that as I read, I was very detached during Marie's portion because I hadn't yet built up an understanding of the characters, so I didn't have empathy for them. But then at the end of the book, for example, when Jean dies, I felt it so much more because we had spent time with these characters, and what had started off very, very quiet was much louder in my head, you know, even though there was the same writing style. It just, like, I was able to feel those emotions more, and that gave it volume.
Well, the book is very short. Like Erin said, you read it all in one sitting on the train back from New York. So it's, to you, I guess, Jen, it just seemed like the book was a full package. Like you just needed to have all of it complete to be able to consider it in your head.
I think so, yeah.
And also, because I never give the disclaimer, I forgot to say spoilers. So if you feel robbed by us saying that, yes, the end is Jean dying, spoilers.
Yeah, that's kind of on you for not... Well, I could be a first-time listener. Welcome to the pod. But everyone else, you should know.
Spoilers.
When you said that you pronounced her name Jean, I gasped. I was like, that is not what I've been saying in my head at all.
Well, they are French and we are Americans, so, you know.
That's true.
I don't know. I think that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah, because Jeanne d'Arc. I don't know why I stumbled over, and Grace will probably cut this out, so you probably won't even know I stumbled, but I did stumble. And that's really a testament to how little I kept with me from 7 years of French classes. So,
well, we also have a running theme on the podcast where at the end of the episode, we say what book we're reading next week. And whenever we have an author from a culture or language we are not familiar with, we're always, we forget to look up how to pronounce their name beforehand. So then we have to pause and then Google it and then come back and retake. So that is pretty standard fare here at Five or Flop.
Do we want to get a little bit into like the plot itself and go through that way?
Yeah. Erin, would you like to do that? Because normally I ask our guests to do it and I've learned it doesn't go well.
Yeah, we've learned not to put our guests on the spot. But yeah, so I guess I'll go through. So we start with Marie. It's like in the aftermath of like an attack by the Iroquois, and they're kind of regrouping as a community, and you can start to see like the colonial influence and the Catholic influences. Like there are nuns like telling their traditional healer like, no, you can't be here. And then as this is all going, you start to see these cultures come together even more and more. You learn that Marie has had a husband who's passed away and children who were taken from her. And then you get to the point where it talks about in the synopsis about Pierre, who becomes her husband. And I think this is kind of where things start to pick up a bit.
Yeah, I would call Marie marrying Pierre the inciting incident.
That does happen very early. Like, it's not a big build up to it at all. And I think that works very well. Actually, the pacing for me throughout this novel worked very, very well for me.
It's very short, so I think Danielle knows she does not have time to waste.
No, she keeps it snappy, and I respect it. So you start to see their relationship, and as they're coming together, and then Marie falls pregnant with Jean. And throughout this pregnancy, she goes to meet with the healer, whose name I'm forgetting, but I think is Nadi.
I could not tell you. I hate to say.
Never mind. Marie goes to see the healer, who passes on a message to her that her daughter is going to have a short and passionate and tragic life. So we kind of already know well in advance where this is going.
Yeah. Like, we don't have any idea of what it'll mean, but we know that that's going to come back.
Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, many tears were shed.
Oh, yes. Agreed. Completely. So then from there, it kind of goes on, and then it fast forwards a bit to when Jeanne is... How old would you say she is? Like a teenager?
17, 18.
I think they do say in the book, I think she is 17. But so she is young and in love with Josephine.
And Josephine, I feel like, is kind of Bridget from Gwen and Art a little bit. She is there not to really be her own character, which Erin will get to in a second, but to be someone in Jean's life.
Yes, completely agree. And I also, for Jen and Grace's reference, I know I'm skipping over the pieces of Pierre, but I'm going to circle.
We have a lot to say about that, I think, based on our notes here.
We have a lot to say. There's some of it that's in Pierre's perspective that I've completely skipped over at this point in time because I know we're going to come back to it. So put a pin in him, just kind of forget about him for now. So Jeanne is in love with Josephine, and Josephine is all a Kathleen called Birdie, married off to this really gross old guy.
Yeah. Sucks.
Yeah, it sucks. And then they have this plan to run away together. Obviously, it does not happen. Josephine, unfortunately, tragically drowns herself.
And then Jeanne stops talking.
Yeah. And
she like just can't anymore.
And all of their, neighbors and extended relatives are like, oh, what's wrong, all of this. And some of the speculation has started that she had been seeing Josephine, which leads to some of the settler boys. And we're moving very quickly now because we have so many gaps to go back and fill in. But we're like at the end of the book now with this short little plot overview I'm giving. So the settler boys, one of which is her mother's best friend's son. So like basically her cousin.
And also the one that is kind of her fiance.
Her potential suitor.
Yeah.
So him and some other boys kill her.
In a very hate crime way.
In a very hate crime. I'm looking at y'all. I don't know if you have more you want to add to that, but
Pierre is there.
Pierre is there. We'll get back to him in a second because he has his own journey that he goes through. And it's really tragic.
Mm-hmm.
And that pretty much takes us right into the end, where she is kind of like almost narrating it, I would say, in a sense, at the ending in that epilogue.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of figure out what happens with the rest of her family and with Marie and Pierre, and we'll get back to them in a second.
And I think, like, just to add on, the book wraps up with Jean, like, in the afterlife almost.
Yes.
Like, there's a snippet of that perspective, kind of giving it, like, a almost semi-happy twinge because she gets to be with Josephine. I mean, obviously, it's a tragic ending, but that's how the book concludes.
Yes. So, obviously, a lot of very emotional stuff happening. Obviously, a lot of clash of religions, clash of cultures. And I want to go into this with Pierre because Pierre is the character who kind of gives us the outsider lens, but also the lens into kind of seeing sexuality across different characters as well.
Yes.
Because there are two hunters who are a couple, two male hunters who are a couple.
Yes. So to clarify, to make it everything super, super clear for our listeners, because this is very important to understand, Pierre is white French. Marie is Algonquin. They have Jean, who is their daughter, who is of mixed heritage. So you have a lot of characters in the beginning portion of the book who are either French or Algonquin, and then a lot of the younger characters in the second portion of the book are of mixed heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would say Pierre's perspectives take up about 20% of the book. Otherwise, it's mostly split between Marie and Jean.
Yeah.
Pierre comes in a little bit later, and I was kind of surprised that we got him at all. The synopsis doesn't really give you the idea that you will get a POV from him. So I think you're right, because while I was reading it, I was asking myself, what is the utility of this? Because everything else is so tightly constructed. We talked about the prose, we talked about the pacing. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking there is a reason that we have these Pierre sections. What is it? And so having that exposure to things in the plot that Danielle needed to be in the head of a male character for, that's a good idea.
And in the head of a European character as well.
Yeah, because you're right. they go on a hunt, and there are two Algonquin men who are an accepted couple.
Mm-hmm. And we can talk about that in the historical accuracy section, which I did forget to write my notes on, but I have it on a webpage on my phone.
Okay, good.
But yeah, so I thought, for me, I think I had the most minority opinion on Pierre's section of the group here. I liked it. I thought it was a good and interesting lens that did not take away from everything else. I think it could have been removed, Pierre section. I don't think the book, for me, necessarily would have had as many layers to it if we did not have Pierre sections. So Pierre sections, kind of in general, first off is that hunting expedition. When Jean is a baby and Marie is back at home, he goes on an expedition with some other Europeans and some other Algonquin men to get meat because they are starving and it is winter and they need to hunt. So what is interesting there is you start to see not only what's happening in Pierre's head and his initial reactions to the Algonquin people and their customs and what is separate from, the European customs at the time, which was very heterosexual, heteronormative white culture. So for me, I enjoyed having that lens. I enjoyed seeing his perspective sort of change from that really staunch, very, very religious POV we got in the beginning to him becoming more questioning and even doubting of his faith as he comes to see his daughter is attracted to women.
Jen, what do you think about Pierre?
Yeah, I think Pierre was the character I surprisingly felt the most emotion from at the end of the book, and that surprised me because I think similar to something that maybe Grace you said earlier, when Pierre's section starts, it feels very odd and out of place at first, and a little fan fiction-y at times. Like, it's kind of like, he did this, then he did that, and it's in the third person, which you're not used to.
Well, because this is something we'll wrap around to later. Marie is in first person. The other characters are in third person. And when Pierre's section starts, it covers a few of the events that Marie had already discussed, but from his perspective. Mm-hmm. So that probably does contribute to that. Like, I would not have described it as fanficky, but I totally get, like, I can picture that in my head.
Yeah. But I think, like, when we get closer to the end of the book and then we come back to Pierre, all of a sudden, for some reason, the, like, connection to Pierre was really strong for me. And I think part of that is, like, you know, as, like, I'm Catholic but gay, and, like, clearly have a lot of doubts myself about Catholicism. And I think Pierre going through... You see, you know, during the middle portion of the book, when Pierre's on the hunting trip, the only thing you really get from him is, like, judgment. And then you get a lot of, you know, hemming and hawing, and he feels very torn and very real. And then I think when Jean dies and you see him come into the field, like, that's when I started crying. Like, that's what really hit me, just because at that point we had spent enough time in Pierre's head, whereas we get to be in Marie's head, but she's never really conflicted in the same way. She knows what she's about. Mm-hmm. She doesn't have to go figure it out. And Pierre is going through this crisis.
Yeah, I think for me that you really hit on why I liked Pierre's section was his kind of internal crisis and him learning, like, oh snap, maybe what I've thought is wrong. Maybe this isn't right, how I've been approaching things. And I think that just adds another level of conflict we would not have had otherwise with just the two women's perspective.
I guess my position on that is I don't dislike Pierre as a character. I think it's very interesting, especially to have him contrasted with Jacques, who is the other leader of the settlement, who is much more hateful and violent and all of these things.
He's evil.
And to have Pierre as sort of a mediated version of that where, you know, he's surface level kind to Marie, and he obviously loves their children together, but he is still a settler in this land where everyone would be better off were he not there. Yes, he's clearly very, like, pious in his Catholicism, but it clearly is used to the detriment of his family. But I don't think being in his perspective taught me anything about the character that I didn't know from the other perspectives. I think it was not enough of a journey for me. This could have been because Danielle was so tight with her writing. Mm-hmm. Every word that she put was not one word extra. But I think that whatever she was trying to do, I'm sure it was very deliberate, but I don't think it computed with me. Not to say that those sections were bad. I wouldn't necessarily have chosen to, like, remove them whole cloth from the book, because I think that they're, at that point when the book is finished, they're like a structural tentpole. Like I said, it's only 20% or so of the book, so it doesn't take up that much of the space. But I do think it was not necessary when she was designing the structure of the book. I think it could have just been the two women.
Okay, that's a fair perspective. I got something out of reading his point of view, but I understand where you're coming from, and I think that's a very valid thing to say.
Mm-hmm. And I feel the same way about both of your perspectives.
And I wonder if some of it is because, like Jen mentioned, she's gay and Catholic. I had a lot of issues with the church when I came out as bisexual, also being Catholic. So I wonder if, like, just our, that specific experience have made us, like, just find that gain more from that section than other readers. I'm not saying it did. I'm not saying it didn't.
No, that always is something that shapes your experience but doesn't always shape it entirely.
Yeah, it doesn't always, like, I'm not saying every Catholic queer person is going to have the same reaction to this section as us. I got something from it. I completely see how you did not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was interesting because when I chose this book, I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, queer and not even Native American at this point, Indigenous Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew very little about the book. And the cover doesn't really tell you that that's one of the themes either. And then it just kind of popped out of nowhere. And I think it was at least a surprise for me that it was part of the book at all.
Yeah, I would agree.
I don't know. That's not that deep of a thing to say. So you can
No, I agree.
No.
I had the same thing when I picked this book up, like just based on the cover. Again, I'm not really a synopsis reader myself. Based on the cover,
As we know.
as we all know, I am the same way. I had no idea that those themes were going to be in there. I guess I didn't. Okay, when I'm in the bookstore, I skim the synopsis, so I didn't really know like enough about where this was taking place to even kind of mentally connect those dots.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought the clashes of religion and ideology and relationships with nature really played a huge role in this book, and a really, really strong role at that.
Oh, yes, 100%. Marie never completely kowtows to the French culture. And the first thing that she does when Jean goes silent is she releases her from all of her chores and her family obligations, and she lets her just spend time in the woods because she knows that nature is going to be healing to her daughter. And it is. It's slow going, but the beauty of the writing in those sections, you can see the positive impact that it's having on Jean.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa, too, in the early sections when it's winter and there's no food in the harsh climate of Canada and, all of that, you can see the, I guess, full circle well-roundedness of nature of the setting.
Yeah, and one thing that I always like on whenever it's touched on and it's touched on many different forms of art and media, the idea that if you take too much from nature is going to react.
Yeah.
And there's a very big theme of like, oh, these white settlers are coming in, they're just taking and taking and taking and not giving anything back, and then they're acting like they're shocked that there's no food for us to eat.
And then that theme, that through line is kind of reflected in the human society as well. You can only take so much before something has to snap.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was interesting that the book had very little imagery except for nature. They don't really talk about the town. They don't really talk about the farm. They don't talk about they talk a little bit about what people look like, but
not with that reverence.
Yeah, not with that reverence, yeah. And I think I didn't know that she was an artist before now, and I think I can kind of see, that she talks about the colors and the textures, and clearly is very focused on that element of natural imagery that you don't really get elsewhere in the book.
Yeah, no, I loved it. I loved nature playing such a big role. I also like how what I really liked was Marie and Pierre's relationship. There was that level of like things were really transmitting between them. Like Pierre was still, I think he's a great foil for Jacques, who's awful and evil and is basically just trying to eradicate all bits of their Algonquin culture, versus Pierre, who is he still wants his children to learn the language and all of that. And, not saying, oh, Pierre's such a savior, he's so amazing because he did all these things. But no, I think
he's a complicated character.
He was a complicated character, and their relationship was very complicated because Marie was still grieving her husband when she had to marry Pierre, and she really didn't have a choice. But in many ways, she came to love him, or at least love what he did for their family in many ways.
They have a very interesting relationship. And in some ways, I wished, not that it had been worse, really, but I felt like, like that it was, while I was reading it, I was thinking, because obviously Marie is based on a real woman who we don't know very much about. And I thought, I hope her real marriage was at least as nice as this, but I don't know that I can believe that it was. Yeah. So I as time passed, I accepted it more and more and more, but it was a little hard for me at the beginning to almost buy into it, that they would have this type of relationship where even though Marie is very clear that's like, I'm marrying you for this reason, we're not in love, etc., that he is kind to her a little bit more than I would have thought. And it took me time to get used to.
For me, I feel like I was able to get on board with it more easily because we had the foil of Jacques.
Yeah, who's a raging, angry alcoholic, etc.
Yes. So for me, I think I was more able to be, if not convinced, on board with it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought things were going to go downhill because there is a point at which he gets really angry at Marie and like grabs her and like yells at her because of like the clash between him and one of the other native men. But then that doesn't really go anywhere. Like, he just, time passes and it's fine.
He never really shows a lot of follow through, and I'm not saying that as, oh, this is a flaw in the character that Danielle should have fixed. I say that as I mean that's part of his character that she constructed on purpose.
Yes.
Like, he is very wishy-washy. He does not make a lot of decisions one way or another. He a lot of times expresses disappointment at decisions that Marie makes that are based in her Algonquin heritage, but he never does anything to stop her, really, from doing these things, like when she sends Jean out into nature, for example.
And this is also, that ties in so much with him being pious.
Yes.
And the whole, like, it's God's will.
And almost in the end, him being present when Jean is killed, you'd think that's almost like a culminating moment for him. Like, he knows being caught between these two cultures, his family and the other members of the settlement, between his religion and his wife's religion, that all of that kind of failure to act in one way or another, this is like the denouement of that, like almost like karmically a punishment for him that this happens, and also that he's there, that it's a failure for him to completely protect his family in one way or another.
And unfortunately, you set us up so well to segue into the epilogue, and I'm not going to let us do that quite yet, even though that would, like, flow beautifully. So sorry to you for that.
We'll come back.
Put a pin in that. I just want to talk a bit about Marie and John's relationship, because Marie knew that her and Josephine were seeing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this goes to be, the strength of their relationship and, like, the beauty of female relationships, mother-daughter relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, etc., etc. But it also tells you a lot about Marie's heritage and her culture. And this is something we'll go into more with historical accuracy, but the idea of, like, two spirits and, gender nonconformity and heteronormativity not being, the mandate in their society. It's really beautiful, and it's a really, I don't know, it's another horrifying thing that white settlers just came to stamp out. As we see it, that is happening in this book. That's just not quite talked about as much.
Yeah, like, that is not information that has made its way to me. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say in the historical accuracy section, because the cultural conception of queer people in Indigenous culture is not something that I really know anything about.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wanted Jean to go to Marie more, especially because that Marie is this wonderful character that's very accepting, etc., and Jean is really going through it. And, like, we know that Jean is destined for tragedy, pretty much, but you still hope, you're like, oh man, maybe if she goes to Marie, can they work together to save her? Or is there some way in which, Jean's fate can be changed? And at the end, no, but I wish that, maybe we had gotten a glimpse into some more in-depth conversations, but unfortunately Jean's muteness prevents that.
Well, also, you don't realize until you get a little bit into that section, but Jean does not know until this time after Josephine is dead that... Did we say that Josephine died?
Yes.
Okay. Until this time after that Josephine is dead, that Marie had a husband and children before.
Mm-hmm.
She had no idea that any of that happened. And I thought that was really telling about, this is, the trauma that ripples down a family tree, that Jean and Marie weren't open about that beforehand.
I have a quote. So there was a beautiful quote from Marie in this book that really hits on what you just said. And it goes, I never wanted to burden my children with my pain, but maybe they've had to shoulder it anyways. Perhaps I didn't need to speak about my past for her to know the losses I hold deep inside my bones. Maybe she carries them in her blood too. Maybe they all do. That gave me like shivers. And that quote was like right after the conversation Grace was talking about. Mm-hmm. That gave me shivers. And I think that goes at like generational trauma is what that is inherently pointing to in, you know, many different ways of how that can take shape, because then you can make the logical conclusion, you know, if are Marie's other children now going to have this and carry this on from Jean as well?
Yeah, and that quote is exactly what I was trying to say, and it sums it up in a much, much prettier package than I could have.
This is a little bit of a pivot, but what do we think about Josephine's ghost? Because I couldn't really make heads or tails of it.
Yeah.
We completely forgot to mention, thank you, Jen. Jeez Louise.
A ghost in the story, what?
Yeah. I was a fan of Josephine's ghost.
Well, was it the ghost of Josephine, or was it like an image that Jean conjured out of her grief? Like, is Josephine completely within Jean, or is it really like the spirit of Josephine by her side?
I kind of took it as both.
Okay.
I think I would need to fully understand the interpretation Danielle was going for. I think I would need to read up a lot more on, you know, the afterlife in the Algonquin community and, you know, perceptions of it there and what this spirit might be meaning and representing. So I kind of took it a little both ways.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was also a nod to, you know, Jean's healing journey. I mean, obviously, like, that's part of how she regains some semblance of functionality. But, like, whether or not it was she was actually there or not, you know, that's debatable. And I think, Erin, you bring up a good point with, you know, the context of the Algonquin spirituality. But in the end, that is how, that's what gets her back on her feet. And I think that's the important part.
Interesting. I had never even considered the idea that it was Josephine's, like, actual spirit. Like, I had never thought about that even for a second. But that's not, like, you know,
I don't think
it frames it differently if I think about that.
I don't think either interpretation is necessarily wrong.
No, but it's just like, wow. Like, it's so great that we have a podcast and we can discuss these things.
Exactly.
Because otherwise I would just have one idea in my head forever.
And I think you do kind of have to decide how you are going to approach the book, because there are so many other elements of their spirituality that are very mysterious. Like, there's, you know, the praying to not have another child, and there's Nadi and the curse. And so you kind of have to decide whether or not you're going to take all of these. I think you do kind of have to take them as true just for the sake of the story.
Yeah.
But there are so many other things where it's just a mystery. And, you know, their spiritual world functions in this very, very mysterious way that I think we're not really used to reading about.
I have 2 more threads I want to go down.
Great. Let's go.
I'm going to hit you with them both and then let y'all decide where we go. The epilogue, definitely we need to talk about. And then this was the first book that kind of prickled my senses of the bury your gaze trope. So I don't know where we want to go, and y'all might have differing thoughts than me on that.
I don't have much to say on the epilogue, unfortunately. I've come kind of unprepared, and by that I mean I read this book not long ago, I might add, and I wrote down in my notes, epilogue kind of vague, and I could not recall a single sentence even. Like, I couldn't tell you... I couldn't have told... They could have gone to Mars in the epilogue. I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay, I can give a big brief summary of the epilogue because I remember it pretty well. So it's basically just kind of wrapping things up. Or I'll give you at least, like, the hard and fast of it. It's kind of like wrapping everything up after Jean dies. What really stands out to me in the epilogue is first, like Jen had mentioned earlier, we get a little bit of a sense of happiness because she's reunited with Josephine. They're together again. But on Earth is, like, sad as hell because, so Pierre, I think he lives for, like, another decade or so. But he really starts to question his faith and everything because of all of this and, like, chooses to stand by his family. And I believe they leave the settlement. Is that correct? Yes. Jen's nodding.
I think so. Maybe
okay.
I'm misremembering.
I think so, too.
This is another Between Shades of Grey for me where I can't remember where they found the buried letters. They may have left the settlement. They may have not. But then after he dies... it's really tragic because even though he left like everything to Marie and their children, they're left with nothing because they're not considered anything because they are a mixed family. And her grave is marked like an unnamed savage, not even her name on it.
Okay. Well, now I sound mean for being like, ugh, vague. And then after you list all of these very specific things that clearly happened in real life.
I think the epilogue is important because, like, I am an optimist. I am a glass half full kind of gal. And if the epilogue hadn't been there, I would have, I think, been left with, like, maybe, like, a little bit of hope that Pierre's gonna, you know, find new spirituality in nature. And maybe that, like, they were gonna live long and happy lives and the rest of the children were gonna carry on their legacy, whatever. But it's not the case because it's reality, and reality is hard and
that's
historical.
That's what sucks about the historical fiction podcast. You get some sad shit in here too.
Yeah. So I think that was necessary to do it justice.
That, I remember the ending when it just ends with like her grave marker that's like an unnamed savage. Like that gut punch.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the hardest hit of the whole book.
I'm like, you mean this beautiful human we just spent an entire book reading about and then no one cares?
Yeah.
And it's sad because that is history and that is very real. But
Yeah. Well, that's how history changes in real time, is by getting people to care about one person's story.
Wow, that's real.
That's deep, Grace. Wow.
Listen, I didn't remember what happened in the epilogue, so I had to bring it somehow. All right, let's go back to your other thread.
Yes. So, the bury your gays trope, which, would anyone like to give us a brief summary of what this is? I'm sure we're all familiar with it.
I can, because
Great.
I loved Lexa from The 100.
I thought you were going to say, I love bury your gays. I was like, Jen.
Bury your gays. No. Well, okay, the bury your gays trope is a very, very common occurrence where in a show or a book or a movie, the gay people die. And it seems to happen so often, and sometimes it feels superfluous. Where, you know, if you're gay, you end up dying in this piece of content. I think in this case, you know, it's the story, right? Like, it doesn't feel like a side note, although it does hurt.
Although I want to jump in here real fast because I agree with you, it's a story. And why I'm bringing it up for this book is because we've had other books already this season where some of our gay characters die. Pull of the Stars last week, Fellow Travelers, The Persian Boy. I mean, I guess that was like history.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Alexander the Great died because he was gay. We're going on record as saying it.
Why I'm bringing it up for this book is because we have 3 queer characters who die out of 4 in this book. Because there are the 2 Algonquin men, one of them die, and then Josephine and Jeanne both die. For the 2 women, it is related to them being queer. So that is why I feel drawn to bring it up with this book. And any thoughts about, you know, is this book an example of that?
This is interesting because I think, I'm going to use Pull of the Stars here as my example. I think the reason that did not ring any bury your gays alarms in our heads when Bridie died was because that was so clearly, at least to me, I'm not to put words in Emma Donohue's mouth or yours, Erin, more of a reflection of the state of her poverty. The fact that she was given so little in life by being a product of one of these mother and baby homes, that does impact the quality and length of her life. Mm-hmm. And so I felt like that message was clear. In this case, hearing you say it out loud, 3 of the 4 queer characters die, I was like, oh, that is a lot. Like, I hadn't, you know, processed that thought in my head, although of course I knew it. But you also can't mistake that all of those characters are all Algonquin. Yes. So I think it's because in this book, Jean's identities are so tightly tied together, it's hard to pull them apart from one another. Mm-hmm. So I think that the centrality of her death to the narrative kind of precludes it from being bury your gays, because that does require it to be kind of flippant or in service of the journey of another character. Like even in Jen, like in the 100, Clark didn't die, like only Lexa died. They had one character whose journey got to continue onward. But I think I would not call it bury your gays.
I would agree with you. I felt drawn to bring it up because, you know, that 3 out of 4 is a stark number. But I completely agree with you. I think there's more reasons at play, and it would almost, to me, and I completely understand why people might feel very differently, to me it feels a bit reductionist to just call it bury your gays.
I think people tend to do that a lot because the point of bury your gays is not just that a gay person dies, because newsflash, everyone does. And also, just even in like a literary perspective, death is an important subject to tackle and address, and it's just going to be present sometimes. But there is a big difference between clearly thinking of your gay characters as more disposable and treating them with the weight that they deserve.
Yes.
Kind of like what we talked about with our disclaimer in the first episode of the season, that doesn't matter to us that these are queer stories. They're also pieces of literature, and that they deserve our analytical lens just as much as any other story does.
Jen, do you have any other sentiments on this? You might agree, you might disagree with us completely.
I think I agree with both of you. I didn't have the feeling of bury your gays. It didn't feel like flippant or just to create a reaction. It felt necessary. Okay, I take that back. I think the hunter who died felt a little unnecessary because you knew that Jean's death was coming. That felt a little unnecessary.
We did already know Jean's death was coming by then. So I agree with you there. I did just want to bring it up because I think and we have not finished reading the rest of the season. We could very well have a very strong example later on.
That's true, but I think it's, episode 6 of Reading Rainbow, I think is a good enough time to bring it up, because I think we shouldn't let the season pass by without having a bury your gays discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is a book that could be accused of that, and I think there could be some very strong arguments made, especially because, and I'll touch on this a little bit, in what I found about Danielle's heritage, I don't think she had a very specific, when she was doing research, it sounded like she found that Jean, her ancestor, was murdered by, other settlers, like male settlers. Wasn't necessarily because she was queer. I don't know if that could have been why. That very well could have been why. So I think it does warrant a discussion. From my perspective, I think that would be a reductionist take on this book. But
I agree.
Well, that's what I wanted to bring up. Does anyone have any other threads?
I feel like I don't really want to say this, but I feel like I just can't let the opportunity go by and stay silent because it's such a major part of the book. I was not a fan of the way that the ending was written. Okay. I felt like the way that Jean is murdered in a hate crime by 2 men, and to emphasize, one of the men we have never met before. I think he's there because he was there in real life, but he was not set up as a character earlier in the narrative. He just shows up for this. And Pierre is there. It felt very exaggerated. The drama of it felt really written in an over-literal, overbearing way, almost like a soap opera. And it made me feel very mean to be reading it and to not be affected by it because it is the death of this character who we care about a lot. But the writing of it took me out of the moment so much, and maybe that's why I did not enjoy the epilogue, because I really liked the whole book, and then the last 5 pages or so, I was just kind of like, ugh. Like, it really? Just didn't, I don't know. The writing of those pages, it took me out of the narrative, and I just feel like that's a major enough part of the book that it's part of my lasting impression of it, so I feel like I should say that.
I see where you're coming from. I think there was so much tension building with Jacques and with the priests that Simon and Farmhand coming and
yeah, when Simon came in and was like, oh, well, when we get married, I would have to fix you or whatever, and then the killing her came so out of left field. It's written in a way to seem like they're doing it intentionally, not like they're hurting her and it happens as a result. They're very literal in making Pierre watch while they kill her. And I'm just it's so much that comes out of what had previously been a book that was pretty subtle in its writing and in its characters' emotional relationships that it was a major negative to me. Not even that it happened, but just the writing of it.
And what's so funny is because with literature, you always get so many different opinions. That was actually, I think, what made it more impactful for me was that it was so out of left field. Because it really, and we haven't, because this season is focused on Reading Rainbow, we're focused more on the queer stories. We haven't even touched on, how this is one of a very early example of violence against Indigenous women and Indigenous women being murdered and going missing. So also just coming from that angle really hits home on the violence aspect and how it's just senseless out of nowhere and it comes across so strong.
I think that that's one of the things that got me. I think there was a way that this exact event happening could have been written to make it feel like this is a real thing that happens, because clearly it is and does. Mm-hmm. But the way that she chose to write it, unfortunately, the only thing that I could think of was that wouldn't happen. And it took me out, unfortunately. Okay. Yeah. So
to each their own reading experience.
Exactly. So that's all I have to say.
I definitely see where you're coming from, and I see how, maybe if I had read this in a different... It's like I always come back to the Underground Railroad and how I was just not in the mental state to be reading this. Perhaps if I was reading this at a different point, I would have had the exact same reaction. So
I think we've learned from the pod, plane to Texas, bad place to read books. Train to DC from New York, great place to read books.
Exactly. Jen, Grace, any other threads we want to touch on before historical accuracy?
I think we've hit on everything that I had.
Let's move on.
Great. All right. We are at ample amount of time.
I was going to say, we've been talking for a while.
So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through some of this. So it's funny. It always seems to be the books I have where they're somehow based on the author's family. So I always try to give that with a grain of salt when doing historical accuracy. It always makes me try to be a bit more sensitive because it is actual people who are related to the author, whether that is like Isabella Allende's mother or Danielle's ancestors. Always want to put respect there. But this is based on Danielle's ancestral line. Jeanne was a real person, really killed by settlers. We do not know her sexual identity. To me, it doesn't matter if that part was true or not, why she was killed. The fact of the matter is she was killed and she should not have been. Mm-hmm. The Métis, which are those, is one of the 3 legally recognized Indigenous people as of the Constitution Act in 1982 in Canada, along with First Nations and Inuit. So they have a population of over 600,000 as of 2021. Those are individuals of mixed heritage. So one parent was Native, one parent was European. That is the French word for it, Métis. And I don't think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sorry to my French teacher. But the first documented Métis was in 1628. Of course, could have been earlier. They just probably didn't have a word for it. But that kind of goes along with the time when settlement by the French was really picking up anyways.
And we see that reflected in the book because the opening sections are in 1657, as we know from the synopsis. And the kind of enmeshing of the two cultures is pretty well underway.
Yes. So the Métis were often the middlemen in terms of trade and negotiation. I feel like we really get a good sense of that in the settlement that they're living in when Jeanne is a teenager. I think we can really see that kind of trade relationship, middleman relationship coming across. So the Algonquin were First Nations people near Quebec and Ottawa, and this was where Marie had grown up and lived until the French came. They did have different clans represented by animal totems. Intermarriage within a clan was actually forbidden from what my research, which I thought was interesting, but they were the Deer clan in this book. So hence, Daughters of the Deer.
Oh, thank God that you brought that up. Like, if we had gone the whole episode with not being like, why is it called this?
No. I think in the synopsis it said something about, a gifted healer of the Deer clan. Okay. I think people could, hopefully put that together.
Good.
I'm going to jump a bit. I'm going to come back to Two Spirits because that's where I forgot to actually write down my notes. So I'm going to just jump ahead and then come back. I couldn't find anything that they had to pay a fee to the crown for unmarried girls. They definitely did for unmarried bachelors in the late 17th century, so it did fit around this time period.
Did we discuss that as a plot point?
It was in the synopsis also.
Okay, great.
So
maybe have my Erin hat on today and I'm not listening to the synopsis.
Something about, forced to pay a hefty fee to the French crown if she did not marry.
Got it.
So I tend to believe that and tend to think that's my own limitations of researching this while I was at work today.
Okay.
And then, although there was something called filles du roi, which were unmarried French girls sent from France that were paid for and sent to the colonies to get married to, quote, tame the settlers. So because that was a thing, and Fil de Roi means girls of the king, since that was a thing, I tend to believe the tax the other way was also a thing.
Can I share real quick? The only reason that I have heard of the Fil du Roi before, which I have, and also that's not how you say it, and I'm sorry, is because listeners from our Dear America episodes might know I love Dear America, and there is a spin-off of that called Dear Canada that they put out in Canada, and that's one of the Dear Canada books. And I would love to read it, but unfortunately, you don't find them in American thrift stores, and so you have to order them online at like $20 a pop. So I don't know if I ever will read it, but I want to very badly.
Okay.
Anyway, That's my 2 cents.
So jumping back to Two Spirits now, which is kind of sort of a catch-all term that I believe, I didn't research the language parts of it, but has roots in indigenous language, or one specific one, of course. Kind of a catch-all for people who are either gender variant in not heterosexual relationships. So queer sexuality, queer gender. And I'm going to read some quotes from this website that I found that I really liked how they worded it.
And maybe we can link it in the notes for our listeners to go and read for themselves.
Yes, if you remind me to do that, I'll do that. It's on a website called Queer Language Evolution, and they have cited sources, which I really appreciate. So I'm just going to read some quotes because I think they sum up what I wanted to say here anyways. In many pre-colonial societies in North America, gender identities and sexual orientations who fell outside of Western concepts of heteronormativity and gender conformity, I'm going to struggle with these words, they are long words here, were not only respected but revered. People from these communities who exhibited both male and female qualities were often healers and warriors. Different nations use different terminology to describe these identities. However, in our modern society, it's really two-spirited that has really lingered in terms of those words to describe it. And it is important to note how intrinsically linked queer and transphobia is within settler colonialism. When colonizers from Europe came to North America and witnessed gender expression and expressions of sexuality that did not fit into white, Western, Christian, cisgender, heteropatriarchal norms with quotation marks, it was used as validation for their conquest. Colonizers and settlers saw gender variant people and same gender relations as things that needed to be eradicated in order to create a more civilized society. So I think that is kind of the perfect summary of what's at the heart of this book. Is that these Christian societies come in and think they're going to eradicate something that is viewed as, special and important and normal in these communities that had existed long before these white people showed up to settle. And yet it was just another example of, we need to teach these people how to be civilized. Like, this is not the correct way of being.
Wow. That's all great. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah. So I thought this book did a really excellent job illustrating that. And I think this book did a really great job of illustrating that, as it is an aspect of colonization that is kind of looked over, I would say, in large part. You don't really hear about how, queerness was used as an example of why people needed to be civilized, quote unquote. Hate that word anyway.
Yeah, I think you certainly don't learn about that in your history class about westward expansion, etc.
And even if you're in a class where you are talking about things like colonialism and the horrible ways Europeans treated native populations, you're probably not getting this lens on it. So I think this is pretty important to discuss and pretty important to have books that are looking at this.
Should we move on to our star calculator?
I would love to.
Great. So we are back again to our 5 categories.
To our adult categories.
Historical accuracy, originality, characters, prose, and vibes. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Erin, let's go.
So I gave this, when I first read it last year, I gave this 5 stars. This I still ranked a 5 stars. However, historical accuracy, I gave it a 4. I couldn't really find some of those specific things that she mentioned about like the taxes and like all of that. And like I believe it, but my research maybe didn't go so far enough. I gave it a 5 across the board and everything else. What I really wanted to call out was that prose, that kind of sparse, light prose really, really worked for me. It kept the pace moving, and as we know, pace is my most important thing. So this is a 4.8, which for me is a 5.
I'll go next. Historical accuracy, I gave it a 5. It's crazy. You know I don't give most of those out.
I know,
also,
I'm impressed.
For me to be higher than Erin almost never happens.
I think it's because I did the research, and I feel like I could have uncovered more had I done more research. So that's on me. Sorry, Danielle.
But I just think that it works. I think that I always give the 5 to a book that not only has correct history, but uses the history in a significant feeling way. Thank you, Jen. And so I just think it does that here. So I'm giving it a 5. Originality, 5. Characters, 4. I liked Pierre, and to a lesser extent, Jean a little bit less, but I loved Marie so much that I think it balances out. The other characters are fine. I think they serve mostly their utilitarian purposes. Prose, 4. I really liked the prose. I think it served the book very well. And vibes, 4. I had to take off a teeny bit there because I feel like I did not enjoy the ending and it took some wind out of my sails. So that is a 4.4. And on Storygraph, I think I gave this a 4.25. So that is a solid, fine, leaning 5 for me, which I realized if we're keeping with the theme of words that start with F, I could just say 4.
No.
So it's a fine, leaning 5 for me. I think this is a very good book.
And sorry not to skip you in line, Jen, but actually hearing you talk about historical accuracy, I changed mine to a 5. I upped it. Because you're right, it's not...
I love peer pressure.
It's not just... Well, when Grace gives a 5, I have to give a 5. No, it's not just about the history itself. It's how that history is used. And I think it is used extraordinarily well in this. So, okay. It's a solid 5 for me.
Shocker, I also gave it a 5 in historical accuracy.
We're unanimous!
Yay! I mean, like, what would I ding it for, you know? Originality, I gave it a 5, and for characters, I gave it a 5. I really felt the characters in this book. Like I said, maybe not at the beginning, but by the end, they were very real to me. Prose, I gave it a 3. I think that's where we differ the most, because I didn't originally enjoy that sparse writing style. I see why it was used, but I think my enjoyment of the book was slow to pick up. And then vibes, I also gave it a 3. I think for the same reason, it just didn't always, you know, I wasn't like turning the pages always. It felt a little slow at the beginning, and of course was a little bit of a downer, but it was very moving. So that leads me to a total score of 4.2. So also fine, leaning 5.
And Jen does not have Storygraph, so you're excused from telling us what you rated it on Storygraph.
Hang on. You know what else? Jen does not have a library card. Learned that today.
Caught red-handed. Okay, if I'm working my way through a 1,300-page Brandon Sanderson book, I do not read very many books a year, but yes, I should get a library card.
And you should probably, that's the kind of book you buy and don't check out, because that's going to
You need to have it for a while.
Exactly. I spent like $15 on a book I'm going to read for a few months. So
Okay, I'll give you that. But
all right. Well, I'm glad that we all came out of this with a positive 4+ rating for Daughters of the Deer.
This was way better than when we brought Jen's girlfriend Hannah on to talk about Love in the Time of Cholera, and we all bullied her.
I am secretly going to be watching the rankings for the shows to see how I do versus Hannah, but don't tell her that.
It's okay. Hannah is currently sitting at our second... If anyone wants an update on this, Love in the Time of Cholera is our second most listened to episode. She does have a time advantage because that episode went out a while ago now.
True.
But our top episode, A Land Remembered.
All the Floridians are listening. If you're listening to the podcast because you were exposed to it via A Land Remembered, welcome.
All right, Grace, what are we reading next time if I'm ever able to check it out from the library?
Next week, we are reading Cantoras by Carolina de Robertis. And I believe, Jen, is this a book you have read before?
I have read it.
Well,
about 4 years ago.
Well, I'm not going to ask you for any details then, but maybe we could just give a quick sneak peek to our listeners. Would you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
I would give it a thumbs up for sure.
Well, we'll have to see if we agree with Jen next week.
And until then, make sure you're following us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at 5orflop_pod and participating in our Storygraph reading challenge if you, unlike Jen, have a Storygraph.
If you look at our Storygraph reading challenge, you see some books you think that we're missing. You can always fill out the recommendation form in the bio of any of our social medias, or just send us an email at 5orfloppodcast@gmail.com.
Until next time, Jen, do you want to sign us off?
Happy reading.
Bye.